Yes, there's me. Hello again. The weirdest thing is the fact of when I wave, it's inverted because the way the camera works, stuff like that. So it feels like a backward version of me. I know it seems strange. Oh, reflection off my book. So since then, it's like stack books behind me reflect. Okay. Anyway, we're looking at now. I admit these are things cobbled from the book. I'm not being correct for that. We're looking at the impact because look at the impact of the government. So in other words, government's going to be doing policies and engaging in things that have an effect on supply and demand. We're going to be covering some of them. Indeed, sometimes we'll be quantifying or shifting some of these. What I mean by quantifying is altering the way they look at items. Now remember, all these PowerPoints are inside and stored inside the course. So you can go and look at them yourselves along with the notes and the such. Okay, now several objectives. And now I admit I like these things larger, but I don't know if I can change the views. Let's see. There we go. That's much better. I like that better. Now I can. The other time I was leaning forward, and it's like because this way I don't feel like I'm crunching my head. Okay, you should be able. In other words, we're looking at price now. A lot of price controls are done a lot of times, and they're even saying they're going as economic welfare. It's like when you have to here, you always be very careful. It's not that we don't, and welfare has a lot of connotations, usually a sub connotation that's a little narrow. The objective is to try to improve people's standards. Remember, in macro, my objective on the macro level is to make the population better off. The difficulty you're going to run into is a lot of times we don't like reality. On the macro level, they don't like reality, so they impose things. Usually price controls, like the mayor of New York are going to be beating on constantly. The mayor of Seattle wants to do the same things. The mayor of New York's far more over the top and saying, this will give us everything grand. It's like, and he just gift the gifts. Supply and demand are pure positive. You go against supply and demand, you're going to get burnt. Be a lot of times in macro, we don't like the answer. Yes, but I have to function within reality. I cannot go out of reality without causing lots of damage and making things worse. So, we look at the impact of price using supply and demand, and then we'll be binding. Now, keep in mind, an item I'm going to mention here, and I'll mention again later, is it doesn't matter if it's binding. A lot of things say, well, it's not binding, so it doesn't matter. No. A price control is you've given the government the ability to set the price where the government wants. The fact the government's not using the price control at times can be irrelevant. I know they can. And so that's going to slow down and have impact on the market. In other words, heavy shocks will magnify and get worse because people know the government's going to step in. The turning amount of shortage. Now there'll be a lot of shortages in price controls. There will not be this giant surplus. I mean, there's a giant surplus. Like no. Now, especially if the government interferes, they'll do weird things. We're going to see it. Remember, the government interfering, affecting, playing with the market will have repercussions, which will hurt the general population. Which again goes this one: unintended consequences. We're saying rent control, any price control, particularly price ceilings. There are a lot of unintended consequences. The government doesn't mean to, unless you're being real cynical. Some people say the government means to mess things up, so they can use that as a basis of government control. Which there is some legitimacy to that. No, sometimes because you'll even have government officials say, "Yes, we know it's going to fail, but by failing, it'll be the justification for giving the government more power because we'll give us more power, we'll make it better." Okay. We will only touch labor supply real quickly because when we do unemployment, I want to do labor supply then, and I tend to have it there when we do unemployment because I like the labor supply in the macro level because we want more job, more growth. Okay, we're gonna look again. We've already touched on tax. We'll go this one. What's the impact of tax again? That that the consumer surplus loss, the producer surplus loss, the transfer of consumer surplus through the revenue generated from the government, and the dead weight loss, what is lost for the tax. Remember the dead weight loss was this thing over here on the right. All these goods were lost when you impose the tax, which we'll see again. determine the impact of a tax on equilibrium price and quantities, which we had touched on already, and analyze this between elasticity and tax burden, again, which we have touched on, so we're not going to be doing those two as much. Okay. Now, the thing is, the previous one I went on to the non-surprising, I always feel we cannot go back when recording this. I apologize. It was just the way the PowerPoint records things. Doesn't let us go back on the slide saying how many seconds on the slide. My bad. It's the impact. And it was the previous slide, things we know won't work. And a lot of what we're doing will not work. And here's the difficulty. Economists as policy analysts try to use theories to change the world. No. That's always dangerous. Because people try to impose theory. Remember, a theory is supposed to tell us how reality works so we can make policy decisions to do better with reality. See, a lot of times people just follow my theory. They're just trying to tell us how reality works, how will people respond, how they react to something, how they do that. For example, if you change a social structure and you alter social structure. Now, it may be a bad alteration of social structure. That's the thing with all we do marriage. You promote promiscuity, which we've done since for decades. Well, guess what? Your social structure breaks down. For example, in Russia, during the communist era, they promoted promiscuity. Everybody, the Marxian view of women should share themselves with everybody. So men and women both said, I'm just in it for something, and left it. So what occurred? In Russia, when they started releasing stats, they discovered for a while, for every one live birth in Russia, there were 7 abortions. Now, to give you an idea, at the height of abortion being really used, and we still have a lot of abortion in the United States, don't get me wrong, we would have 1 abortion for every 3 live births. They were having 7 abortions for every 1 live birth. In other words, what you do, you change your culture. Now, a theory would say, don't promote promiscuity because this may happen, and this may do things to doom your nation. It'll undercut trust between males and females. They won't work together. They won't create binding units and stuff like that. Now, that did change the world. We have to be careful about that because people think my theory can change the world. A lot of things will say what will happen if you do things. I'm always cautious about that. Policymakers often enact price controls when they the policymakers, the government, policymakers means the government. Oh, I don't like what the price is. It's too high or too low. We're going to make it better. We didn't change reality. And that's the difficult thing. Well, I don't like what the answer is. I know that's the answer. Well, we'll just mandate it. We'll say the price should be lower. You got these idiots out there saying, well, we should just mandate the price of gas be back to $2.30. Why? Because we'll decree it. Yeah, but you have to change the cost structure. So no, we can just decree it. We're lawyers. And that's where we have a problem because they think they can decree. You can't. A lot of these policies can generate problems of their own. It's a lot of bad normative because of what I think, what I want, what people want to be, or what I think it should be. A difficult thing we're going to run across the green agenda is the fact that the green agenda is massively expensive. But yet people talk about cheap green energy. It'll be cheap and free. We'll have all this green energy. We'll be having everything free. It'll be great. Well, they just act like everything's built like that and it just appears. No, that's not reality. In other words, they want to be that way, so they think it can be that way, and it's dangerous. That's a killer. Two price controls we're dealing with, which basically stands a price ceiling, a legal maximum price could be so which the government says the price may not go above this point. That's how high the price go. Cannot be above that. Can't go above that. That's wrong. We're not allow that. So if it tries to go above that, boom, and it's back to ceiling. And the government thinks they can do that. This happens with many consumer goods, often food. It's applied a lot in natural disasters. Well, it's a natural disaster. Everybody should have the stuff cheap. A lot of people, trying to use the term price gouge, they're gouging out their eyes. Marketing is very important here. No slight against the marketing majors. Price floor, legal minimum on the price which good can be sold. Minimum wage laws being the key one of this, but it's been done with lots of other goods. You have a lot of people who get into it and cause that. In fact, up until the 70s, soda used to be made from sugar, which has less weight retaining capacity than when soda, stuff like that, was made. Was made of sugar. Then it became made with corn syrup because the government made sugar price prohibitive. It restricted the importation of sugar. Because you want to make sure people who make sugar in the United States make money. Okay. How price ceilings affect market outcomes? Not binding. If it is above equilibrium, theoretically, there's no effect on price and quantity sold. But once you do that, once you make a price control, even if it's not binding, the government has gained the power to control price. The government now has the ability to set the price wherever they want it because they've gained that power. So it doesn't matter what an industry is going to look at that. Markets will say, there's an opportunity. I will not take that opportunity because why? The government, will tag me. The government will go and punish me for having a price they don't like. So firms, individuals, once the government controls price, firms, individuals will change their behavior. A binding constraint. For pricing, a binding constraint, the price below equilibrium. Again, once the government has the power, they're going to use this. You set below equilibrium. Market price must be the price ceiling. In other words, the price ceiling, binds and sets. It's the new price ceiling. It's the market price. What's not, but it's what you get there. Okay. Acronym one. Now, if you're wondering, why it shows easily, originally these PowerPoints, the background was all in white and it was bloody boring. So I changed to blue. Now let's just doing a simple example of it. I'm not even worried about things. Currently the equilibrium is 3. There you go. And people would buy 15. Okay. Now the consumer, which is the muffins buyer, basically people come along and say, I would like the price to be at 2 because the people erroneously think if the price is at 2, this is the one down here, that, it's at 2. The people think I'm going to get 20 odd muffins. Let me go over here somewhere because I get at $2, I get all the muffins I want. When the reality is the firm's only going to make as many muffins as they can afford to make. So they make this many. In other words, the amount of output in the industry goes down. Everybody wants muffins. Nobody can get them, and not many. You put a constraint, a restriction on it. And so when they impose pricing, they put a restriction out. They want to pay at 5 is non-binding. Remember, once I have, in other words, a lot of times industries will push for, or people push for price controls that are non-binding because the government has gained the power for it. Governments especially will push these things because then they have the power to do the price controls. They say, I'm just trying to help people. In fact, in New York, they've had the ability, pardon my accent, to control rents for decades and decades and decades. And New York has slowly seen apartments decay and rot out. Because people said, the rent's too darn high. It's like, well, yeah, you may not like the rent, but how do you solve that? The government will mandate it be cheap. Now, all this is the equations, I admit. And some of the quizzes, you'll play with some equations. I'm not worried about it, in all honesty. But you can do that. The quizzes, that's why I have the quizzes for these things. Because this one's pointing out in the sense of when it was binding, see, people wanted 18 of them, only 10 were made. So before, 5 people were getting muffins before at the old price, they lost. In fact, even some of the people with this diagram, right? You can say, well, yeah, but see, this was transferred from the sellers to the buyers because those buyers gain a cheaper price, but they may not be getting the whole benefit. In other words, we know the deadweight loss, the loss in output is this whole big area. This is transferred, the block in red or reddish is transferred from producers to consumers. Oh, the consumers gained, but they may not have gained that much because these consumers over here, they before didn't buy the good. Now they're buying the good because it's cheap. Some of them may be getting the muffin. And they even value it at the old equilibrium price. And we're paying another way. We're waiting in line. Waiting in line costs time. Which is funny because I talk about here. Later on we'll talk about, people talk about taxing people on being on roads because it's congestion, so horrible. Well, if you're waiting in line for 2 hours to get a muffin, isn't that congestion? Isn't that horrible? Yeah, so cool. We can invent this stuff. But yeah, we deal with that one. Okay, when the government imposes a price, it's above, it theoretically has no impact. The reality again, anytime the government constrains, it can have an impact because the government is like a spider in the web. Once established has the right to control prices, that's all it needs. It will use that power. Okay, again, a binding and non-binding price ceiling. See, non-binding. So, look, see, it's non-binding. Here's the boom. It's not binding and it has no impact. Yes, but they have the power to do that. Firms will react because the more what if you have a firm will be thinking, saying, I have to be careful because if demand does this, I have to be careful because I can't respond to demand fully because the pricing is there. Or if there's a supply shock, my costs rise. I'm going to be careful about that. In other words, firms will become very leery about changing, adjusting the markets because they'll be looking at what the government's going to do, react to. And the government has the power to change prices at will. Once they've gained the power, they'll use it. Now, a binding price is what we already dealt with. And a binding price ceiling, which I fault Mankiw for not doing this because he knows this. Now, we had three. I'm going to put in the original one, which will be, since we had green, we'll leave it in green. Here's $3. I know, that was horrible. I mean the prep, I meant the... There we go, that was much better. Here's $3, all right? Now, when the government imposes a price, remember, the amount that people actually get, because what is produced? 75. Fewer goods are produced. So all these goods up here, these are lost. That's the deadweight loss. That's the lost output. These are goods that would have been available. People would have been made satisfied. They have lost. They have suffered. They have lost these goods. They have had it eliminated. They have suffered the impact of the policy. And that's very important. Between the 2 and the 3, this was transferred from the producers, from the people making the good, the producers, producer surplus, and it was transferred to the consumers. I guess shouldn't use consumers. Should use yellow. That blended way too easily. To the consumers, to the consumer surplus. It was able to consumers gain something. And again, they may not have even gained all that because these consumers over here, these consumers weren't buying the good before. They're going to buy it now because why? It's cheap enough. But they're not everybody's getting. You only get as much as there is produced. Before we're getting 100, now we're only getting 75. That's as many as people are getting. They may want more, it's irrelevant. You even have government saying, and they'll have more. That's the crazy mayor of New York. He's not doing it. You have many politicians who say that. We'll mandate be cheap and you'll have more of it because we have decreed. We are lawyers. I know I pick on lawyer. The reason I pick on the legal system and the bad impact it has in the economic system, because most politicians and government bureaucrats tend to be lawyers, especially high-level government bureaucrats. And the lawyers used to saying, if a court decrees it is so, it is so. That's it. That's how people are thinking, men can be women and women can be men. It doesn't matter. This old joke goes, how many legs would a sheep, would a dog have to kind of tail his leg? And as Abraham Lincoln said, 4, because the tail ain't a leg. But courts think they can mandate that. Lawyers think they can have a court mandate that, and that makes it reality. It does not. The government can mandate that I am 6'3" and I still have my build and musculature that I had when I was 21. I would like that, but nope, didn't change reality. And that's the impact. So these binding ceilings, we get shortages, and these are non-solving shortages. When the government creates these binding ceilings, you get lots of shortages. Not enough good is made. That weight loss you're talking about. Sellers must ration goods. The sellers are rationing them, preventing the consumers. They act like the sellers preventing from getting goods. No. Those people show up and they buy the goods. It's being rationed not by the seller. The sellers don't know it's because if the seller rations, the seller just let the price go to equilibrium, and there you go. The government's causing the rationing, but the government doesn't like taking responsibility. Because remember, the way the seller rationing, hey, you pay the money, boom, you give me cash, you get the good. There you go. Oh wait, the government said it's not that. Then it goes to who gets the good. The person who shows up first, period. The government just goes into the whole rationing thing. The government say, well, I don't like the way the sellers are rationing the goods. We must reallocate the goods then, which adds another degree of control, which is going to do it. Okay, rationing mechanics are rarely desirable. In other words, they're very inefficient. Which I agree. Long lines waste buyers' time. Way back in the previous slide, you saw that food line in Venezuela. That was created by the government. The government said food will be cheap. Oh, there's no food. Well, people are waiting in line for 6 hours to get food. That's wasting what? Time. There'll be a bias of sellers. Sellers will favor some people over others. They may usually, the only time sellers may favor people is my long-term customers, because why? They always come back to me. The customer's loyal to me. I must be loyal to them. I will reciprocate loyalty. In rent control, yes, there'll be a lot of bias in sellers in rent control because I need people who can, get things fixed. Now, the bias of sellers has said support where, in general, the system is just inefficient because why? The good may not go to the good person who values the most. That's not the buyer. That's the seller's fault. Someone comes in and says they want to buy a muffin for $2. The government mandated the price be $2. It's a baked sugar blueberry muffin, and the person getting it values it $2.02. There's another person who values it $5. The person who values it $2.02, they were in line first. They get it. The $5 person does not get it. They have lost a lot of gain. Where if it were at $3, the $5 person would be getting it and realizing a $2 surplus, a $2 gain. The person would be willing to pay $2.02. He or she's not buying because why? They weren't willing to pay $3 because they didn't value it that much. But they'll complain about not getting a muffin because they wanted the government to control the muffins to get a muffin cheap. Unfair. Anytime you hear that term, unfair. It's like the point I made, which you'll see a few times, from Labyrinth, when she goes, that's unfair. And he goes, oh, there's that word again. Whatever is your basis of comparison? I'm not being cruel here. Markets are very fair. You have the resources, you get the goodies. That's it. We're dealing with scarcity. Markets tend to create more goods to meet scarcity, meet people's needs. People don't like the way it is done. Let's say it's unfair. Why is it unfair? It's because other people don't like the outcome. There's nothing unfair about reality. It's just reality. Defy it, you get hurt. Now, again, rationing, just like that term, it sounds like someone saying, you get one and you don't, you get one and you don't, stuff like that. Like someone's cutting up the pine, doling out to everybody. No. In supply and demand, who gets the goods? The people who are willing to pay the price. Who's getting the reward for making the goods? The people making the goods. There you go. Everybody who desires a good, remember, everybody thinks this cool good's worth it. They're all getting the good. All these people, when supply and demand is doing it, they're getting the good. And all of them value the good more than they're paying. And with every person that's demand curve, they're paying less. In other words, they're paying less than what they value the good at. They're winning. In fact, even the last person who's paying, instead of doing the muffins, paying exactly $3 for the muffin, he or she's paying $3 for the muffin. That's how much they value the muffin. They're breaking even. Everybody before them, they're doing better as far as consumers. Every producer before them, they're doing better. So it actually did it in a very straightforward, fair way. The people who desire the good and view it as worth that, they're getting the good. A lot of people may not like it because they feel, well, the prices are high. Yeah, but that's reality. Markets are efficient. They're not as impersonal. They're very impersonal. Whereas the government says, "I'm going to help you. I care. I love you." It's like, oh, the government doesn't love you that much. Because markets can be very personal and will create positive shifts if left alone. Remember, in the market, the consumer matters. In supply and demand, fulfilling the needs of the customer. That is what matters. Don't mind me, I'm walking around a little bit, circling blood. That is what matters to the customer, is fulfilling their needs. That's what matters to the firm. So a lot of firms will be very engaging and kind. In fact, heck, I'm picking on this movie coming out, The Odyssey, because, well, one, it's not making true the material, and two, they're doing what they do a lot of times. They're insulting the people who may see this movie. They're insulting who'd see this movie. It's an action flick. You guess some guys will bring their wives, their girlfriends, stuff like that, but it's a guy flick. What are they doing? They turned Odysseus, who's supposed to be like the most clever of the ancient Greeks, into a weebo. He's just a man because they had the person whose translation they use is like, they just trash him. He's just an idiot. And so what are they doing? They're attacking. They are ruthlessly attacking people who see the movie, saying, "Oh, you don't like this, you're doing this, you're doing that." And so this is what I'm attacking. That's personal. You're saying if they don't see my movie, they're bad words, they're racist, or whatever. It's like homophobic or whatever. Well, it's kind of like you're not being very. What are you not doing? I'm not being very personal, people, because what I'm saying, it's Hollywood views themselves as lords, above human beings. See, in markets, when you put yourself above people, you tend not to get sales because why? They learn to dislike you. See, I have to be very personal, engaging, and thinking about people. In other words, I have to say, what do they want? How do I make them better off? What do they need? And fulfill it. Markets achieve that. And so they tend to be very personal. Doesn't mean not people selling things who will be cold, analytical, whatever. In fact, a lot of times people went to the cold and analytical person because, yes, he or she's cold and analytical, but they always give me the best price and they get it done quickly. Who am I fulfilling then? My customers. Because that's really what they care about. Whereas if you're a barber and not personable, people don't come back to you because why? Well, you're not very personal. Because they're all probably charge the same price. And I said a lot of people because they'll say it's rationing. See, we're just deciding who gets the goods. It's rationing. No, remember, in markets, everybody who values the good at that price, all those people in yellow, they're getting the good because why? They value the good. They value good more than the cost of making the good. They have won. Whereas when the government engages in price control right off, remember, when the government engages in price control, output falls. Which means at the best, it's the price control level. At the best, some people may be gaining, but a lot of people losing. And we're losing output. There are fewer goods available. In other words, we've lost efficiency. And people no longer look to markets. Okay, since we can get price ceilings where they are, gasoline, upside, I use nothing. In other words, people say, okay, we have supply shift. Now, this is a great example. We have a supply shift in gasoline, and we have a price ceiling. Now, usually this happens in the United States. Price ceilings kick in when you have disasters, hurricanes, stuff like that. But the price ceiling kicks in. And so you get a shortage of gas. Because how much? Well, in this case, it was supply shock. In other words, why did gases, even before the whole Iran thing, you know why gases rose? Besides all the Greens always suing to stop pipelines and stuff like that, In California, the state of California is shutting down the refineries in California, saying, "Oh, you're going to make the gas this way," which makes gasoline very expensive to make. California refineries account for 10% of the gasoline made in the United States. A little bit more than 10%. That doesn't seem like much. But when you take 10% of the gas we're making offline, because the state of California basically mandated those refineries close down or do things they want, you're getting what? A shortage of gas. In other words, that supply curve is shifting inward, not because the media fell from space, because the government shut down the refineries. The government shut down the oil price lines. That's why when they came in, the oil price lines were authorized by the Trump administration, but California immediately went to try shutting down the refineries because they wanted price of gasoline to go up. They don't want people to have gasoline. Now, if you say, well, the price ceiling will solve it. Well, really? If the government imposed a price ceiling, everything thinks if there's a price ceiling, I'll get as much as we had before. They're all thinking it'll be over here. No. Now, you just one where there's a price ceiling above, it would be right there. But if they made the price ceiling where the price used to be, look at that supply curve. In other words, we'd be like right about what? Right somewhere around here. Right near the edge. That's just estimating. We'd be there. We'd have less output. Why do we have it? Government policy caused it. And not being cool, you can say on the flip side, hey, yeah, well, we're fighting Iran. That's coming up the Persian Gulf. Yeah, it is. Another way when you have rationing is in a type of price control. The government steps in and says, well, it's not fair. Who says it's not fair? Everybody's not getting the right thing. So you get a ration card. In other words, the government steps in and hands out ration cards saying, not only do you have the price control that restricts output, to buy a good, this is one from World War I. You actually had to show up to the government with that ration card. They would stamp it when you bought your goods and say how many you'd have a right to get. So it adds another layer of bureaucracy. Remember, bureaucracy is not free. Bureaucracy costs money. We're adding another layer of bureaucracy. I'm stepping in and saying, I'm engaging in a control, a restriction on the price to theoretically make it better. The government's, I know the answer. And so they add another control. So what will happen, people go, it would be fair because same amount. No, they won't. People the government tends to like tend to get better ration cards. And that's another layer. Remember, bureaucracy costs money. It raises taxes, supply bureaucracy. Bureaucracy gets exemptions from these things. And so you'd have these rationing controlling going on with the price controls. You'd have this rationing of the good, the restriction of the good. Don't mind me. So it creates another layer of, and it actually, it's for August. It's a sugar card. How much sugar can you buy? You had to in World War I, World War II. How much gasoline can you buy? How much, at least speaking, how much, meat, vegetables, stuff like that was all regimented and controlled because the government needed to take, resource for itself in trying to control prices. Because then there'll also be, I can't slide back, but we'd have that restriction saying there's this much. I'm assuming we could do blocks and squares, but when they say you have that much, remember, the government, when you're in any kind of wartime situation, the government's usually reserving a big chunk for itself and its buds, of which, to be one of its buds, you could be close to government, which we're not. One of the rationales, the government tends to favor the very powerful. Now, we're going to have one of these polls of, various things. That's the aspect of rent control. And that applies to any price control, just rent's there. And there's a poll of economists. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to trash through these polls. But in general, economists will say 95% say rent control doesn't work. Those price controls don't work. They don't rent. I mean, now keep in mind, rents are even more rigid than other goods. So if you don't believe in rent control, you should never believe in price controls. 1% of economists say no, rent control can work. Now sometimes because they're idealistic or they want to achieve something, or again, roughly speaking, they're suffering bad normative. An economist, Alan Blender, who is a neo-Keynesian, he believes in government intervention. He had written dozens of articles saying, price controls, wage controls, something, they don't work. Minimum wages don't work. Rent control doesn't work. He wanted to be chairman of the Fed. Well, he was told that if you want to be chair of the Fed, you got to change. You got to be one of the Fed. You got to change your opinion. He did. He said price controls, wage controls, something like that, they make everybody better off and they work. Why? He wanted a position. So that's good. Personal pressure can have that. Now, rent control, look at quick rent control, and I'm being fast in this, I will admit, because I deal with rent control on the micro side in micro. But we'll take the instrument effects of rent control. Now, a lot of people say rents are horizontal. When it's like, oh, no, rents are not horizontal. Because people think of, if I have rent control, see, this is the level of output. And at level of output, all this can be transferred from the firm to the consumer. And there'll be no loss in output because why? The supply curve is vertical. Now, he doesn't assume of having it like really steep. No, what does happen with rent control is the fact that there will be a reaction over time, like this. In other words, in all industries, price controls tend to have this situation. At first, particularly with rents, you have that supply curve that's not horizontal. It's, very inelastic. See how tilted it is? It's like right here. Now, impose the rent control, output falls. You create a deadweight loss. That's this light deadweight loss, the one that says DWLSR. And that's in the short run. Now, over time, the supply curve is going to shift inward. In other words, anytime you have rent control, any kind of price controls, supply tends to shift inward. In other words, these goods disappear. It actually makes sense because these are several points of things that happen because of government intervention. One, no new building or production, occur. No one builds anything new. No one constructs anything new. Why build something to lose money? If you know you're going to lose money, do you ever sink money in something? No, you do not. The government says, oh, they will because I want them to. No, doesn't matter. Because why not? It keeps me awake. But no, literally speaking, people won't build. They won't create. In other words, the goods dry up. No one makes new buildings. No one makes new production. New York City has had 8 million people for 100 years. 8 million people. How come we have less housing now than we did 100 years ago when the number of people hasn't changed? It's a conspiracy. I'm going to say that. Conspiracy. It's being controlled. It's like, no. You engaged, as I said, 9 years ago, New York City started engaging in price controls to make everything cheap for everybody. At first, you had little deadweight loss, people getting it cheaper, instead of price equilibrium. Instead of price equilibrium, right here, they got price down there. So in other words, they got, that's the price they got. So instead of price equilibrium, they got that price. They were what? They were losing. Now, here's something we forget about. The existing stock of housing, capacity, talent, decay. In other words, I said housing is there. The existing stuff we use to produce and make the stuff decay. It goes away. I can't make the good. I can't produce the good. Since I can't produce the good, what do? I apologize. I stop making the good. I stop producing or making the good because why? Oh, excuse me. I say I can't make any money, so I don't make the good. I don't produce the good. The good dries out. What I mean by talent, if we're not making the good, the people who use and make the good, they lose their talent because they're not doing it anymore. They lose their skill, ability to be able to make the good because why? I'm not making it. In fact, one of the reasons I am marginally protectionist is because once the industry is destroyed, you can't bring it back. You can't just will it back. This industry shall come back. No, it doesn't happen that way. And so in housing especially, you saw a lot of housing stock decay. Even existing buildings, no one repairs things because the cost of repairing and upkeeping maintenance on apartment buildings in New York is less than the money you're going to get from it. Why would I spend? People done things saying this apartment here would cost $50,000 to renovate. It would mean the firm would theoretically, just to get back the principal under the rent control, not to get back, principal plus interest, just the principal, just the $50,000 spent to renovate an apartment. Just to get that back would take 40 or 50 years. Now keep in mind, before you hit 40 or 50 years, it's going to need to be renovated again because it's going to have a slow breakdown. And so what happens? People don't make anymore. People don't produce anymore. So no new building, existing stock decays. It's brutal. The markets tend to prefer rich people, especially in rents, but in anything, especially when you have price controls, be a preference for the rich people because they just want the good. And the only way they can get the good is pay. And also, there'll be no one controls rich people. No one cares what happens to them. And rich people pay for maintenance or they'll get the good. In other words, markets make more things for rich people because no one price controls rich people buy. This is one of the reasons rich people will try to support a lot of these things, price control, because it's saying, oh, I'm so generous. I'm making some other person not get paid for what they're doing. Oh, I'm so kind. And they know somebody's still getting it, some other way. You'll see a lot of that when people pat themselves in the back for generosity when they gave away your money. And this is called thievery, not generosity. In many cities, you have development of apartment hunters. Heck, even when you don't have rent controls, you have professional apartment hunters. Because why? I don't have the time to do what? Spend looking for an apartment. I will hire somebody who can do that. Rich people can. Comically enough, a black market will develop. The black market is an underground economy. People doing things where the government can't see and stuff like that. That's why I get the term black market. And it develops. Like, for example, in Venezuela, there was a massive black market in food. Milk, eggs, bread, stuff like that. At least we can load them up in their car, drive from Colombia to Venezuela, pull over in the street in the city, open their trunk, and start selling off goods. Because why? They were violating the price controls. Why they violating? Nobody could get the goods. So a black market develops. And in general, you don't want a black market because they're very inefficient and wasteful. I apologize. The government, once it starts controlling prices, will soon discover it likes the benefits to itself in either crass corruption or favoritism. These are my buds. I'll make sure they're doing well. I'm just the government. I'm greasing myself. The number of people until Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor in the 90s, every mayor of New York from the 1930s to Rudy Giuliani in the 1990s lived in a rent-controlled apartment. All of them did. Think about that. Why? This rent control is meant for the little people, the poor people, the middle-income people. The mayors of New York have all been rich, especially the ones who, have been government their whole life because they probably, graft, corrupt, stuff like that. Why does they have a rent control department? How can you in a good rent control department? How'd they get that? Well, they're government officials. They make sure what? They get in the front of the line. So you get a lot of government favoritism and stuff like that. In other words, people say, well, the government should, in fact, the mayor of New York, I'm picking on him because he's an idiot. In fact, one of the reasons he's an idiot, he's a socialist, a massive socialist, because he's a Nepo baby, by his own definition. His mother is a rich producer. His mother and father both rich, very rich, and she's a rich producer in Disney. In fact, he got his first job from Disney being, making a rap and stuff like that. Why? Because mommy was a producer. And he goes, man, I got this because I was a Nepo baby. Yeah, I'm a Nepo baby. It's like, so how is he getting it? Connections. In fact, When you see the rise of corruption and bad things happening, connections matter more. And who does that cut out? Truly poor people. This guy, that man in New York, like, I'm a poor person like you. I'm an African. It's like, if you ever seen Madani, he does not look African. I'm sorry, I'm going to say bad way. He looks like a white guy. That's just reality. He looks like a white guy. And I could care less if he's white, black, brown, plaid, for crying out loud. Oh, if I was hiding something, I might think about the plaid because that draws in customers. Unless they buy tattoos, then it's nothing special. And so, but he'll discover he's directed to itself. But he says we're going to provide housing. Oh, he goes, well, if the state and the federal government would give me $100 billion, we could have housing for everybody. Well, wait a minute. Why is the $100 billion from the state and the city? It's going to appear. It's going to automatically fund itself. Well, no, somebody else has to give me resources. So why do people in other states in the rest of New York have to pay high taxes so he can give goodies to his constituents? And when the government provides these things, there's often a bust. A great example is he's starting a government grocery store. Now, this government grocery store that he's starting, it's going to be a standard grocery store. He's like, we're going to have 3 of them by 2035. Wow. In fact, the first one he broke the clip the thing off of is going to be done in 2029. 3 years to build a grocery store? And not just that. 3 years and $30 million. $30 million. You know what the private sector pays for doing grocery stores? I'm using all these figures. Aldi pays about $1.6 million to make a grocery store in New York of the size he is talking about. But the government's going to be spending, the city of New York's going to be spending more than 10 times as much. In fact, like 17 times as much building a grocery store. Are they insane? I mean, you have to understand, is the government suffering dementia or something like that? But the government does not get punished for failing. They'll say, oh, we're being exploited, we're being ripped off, there's a conspiracy against the laws and stuff like that, which he's done. Well, they wouldn't give me the $300 billion. If they gave me the $100 billion, oh, it'd be great. Why should other taxpayers in other states and the rest of New York pay so he can give goodies to people? But he believes they should. In fact, when he wanted a millionaire's tax, and well, he got it. But then one of the millionaires said, you know what? I don't need to live in New York. Not just me, but I was looking at building a place that's going to employ long-term 5,000 plus people in New York, all earning good money. He said, you know what? Forget this. The city of New York coming after me. Instead, I'll move these jobs, this operations, to Florida. It'll lower the cost of living for the people who work for me, so they can get things cheaper, and it'll be less hassle for me. That was why he was in New York, because it's where they've always been. He decided to make the change. And keep in mind, this is a mayor who, when a guy killed off a president, CEO of a healthcare company, he said, well, that guy probably had it coming to him. He should just realize. And he said, free the guy who killed him. I would want to live in a city in which a guy says I should be killed. Again, how it affects outcome. They say it has no ill impact. Yes, it does, because remember, it establishes the right of the government to control prices. That's a very dangerous right. Binding constraint, it's set above. Some sellers on the oils and some, it's, buying, what's price floors? I said those are very rare. Okay, when the government imposes a binding price floor, going to price floors, theoretically surplus arise, and they do. Because people think the government's mandating we're going to make money in this good. The government's mandating. So the government sets a price floor so that people making the good can make money. This has happened a number of times. And every time it's been tried, surpluses arrive. Now, when you do this, sellers who appeal to biases, personal biases. Now, we use the term personal biases. For example, I don't mean preference bias. Like for example, I've got my I got my Luke Skywalker, my Jedi shirt on, right? That's personal. That's appealing to what I want. It's the personal bias to what I want. I didn't get the Last Jedi one or something like that. I got this one. I try to do what Mark Hamill says because he doesn't like people like me. He doesn't like conservatives. He doesn't like people. We have a different opinion. Because if you like me, should be shot. It's like, oh well, so nice. We're picking Harrison Ford later. So personal biases, but a lot of times you get a lot of suppliers may try to, and there will be personal biases. Like I'm like you because anything. Heck, going to what people said. There are people who say, and various groups, you should only buy people of your group. That's appealing to a personal bias. In a free market, price is the rationing mechanism, not here. In other words, no biases in the free market that way because I'm a free market. If you're paying for me, I'm what? I'm buying. In other words, if you're paying, I'm buying. That's it. That's the way the market rations things. I don't care. The only thing I care about, markets are very good this way. Markets shatter discrimination better than any other institutions. Markets will destroy it better than any other institutions because the fact of markets only care about the money, which is good. So don't care if you're black, white, male, female. What are you paying? You're paying? Cool, you're in. There you go. That's it. That's what they care about. Now, a lot of times sellers may not be happy once they sell them back. One of the reasons you get price floors where the government's trying to create a binding price floor is the sellers are saying, I'm making a good, I should be making more money. It's not fair. In fact, the movie industry right now is saying it's not fair. The people aren't buying my movies, they're getting my tickets. The government should save us. In fact, during the Great Depression, right? The government employed people in the media and gave them good, cushy jobs to make goods, to publish articles. Because why? They were connected to the government. Because the government played favorites. The government was boosting output. But remember, if the government's going to do anything, it's going to get resources from some places. We'll see in a second. I apologize. Okay, when you have a market of the price, now again, non-binding. The one left is non-binding. But non-binding established the government's right to set the price floor. So the government has had the right to set the price. That's the government's always after. Or as if you ever watched the old movie Cleopatra, when Caesar wants to be king of Rome, and they're like, no, and they said you'll be king of Rome, king of areas outside of Rome. And Cleopatra says, take it. If they just make you king of a village in Libya, take it. Because once you have that, you will take more and more and more and more and more because you establish the precedent that is yours. That's what a binding price floor is. Once the government has the right to set the price, they have established they have the right to set the price. And then consumers and firms, instead of looking at equilibrium to solve the problem, will go to government and say, the government should give it to me. Now, when they have a binding price floor, the consumers stop buying. Demand becomes the binding constraint. We have this demand curve here, right? I apologize for showing my bald spot. It's because I want to see it's a small graph. Usually, remember when I'm doing this in class, I get this giant PowerPoint up that's like 8 yards by, or 8 feet by, 4 feet. So I get lots of space. I get a little space there. Did I just do that down there? I think what is I caused Google almost there. Oh, it's just directional. So demand's my constraint. So I'm only making as much as people buy. So all these goods they're making beyond that, these goods right here, no one's buying these goods. What's the surplus is? These are goods that are made, but no one's buying. When people make a good, no one buys. So I'm getting for it? Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. So price floors, without the government stepping in, price floors break of their own weight because no one is buying those goods. So once they're making these goods, taking the price floor guarantees I'm going to make money. But no one comes and buys these goods. Because no one's coming and buying these goods, they're worth nothing. I'm getting zero for them. What's the one way I can make sure I get the good? I cut the price. And so the firms will cut the price. Oops, my bad. The firms will cut the price. Give me blue. They'll cut the price and they'll lower the price to here. Go back to equilibrium. A lot of people don't like equilibrium. They don't like that. So saying, but the price floor cannot sustain it. So what they do is they step in and the government buys a surplus good and destroys it. Now here we're looking at minimum wage. I'm going to glide over minimum wage right now. Now the interesting thing is, this is a question of, our minimum wage in terms of this one. Look at this. This is an interesting one in terms of criminal rate. States choose what have money to do. A federal minimum wage is low unemployment for low-wage workers. 50% of economists say yes. If you raise the minimum wage, unemployment goes up. 16% no, it doesn't. 10% have no opinion. This is a great one because all minimum wages is a price floor. Price floors don't work. The vast majority of economists, 98% believe price floors don't work. Okay, a number, 16%, a number of them are saying, hey, I want it to be this way. It should be actually dictated. I've decreed it should be this way, so it should be this way because I've decreed it. Well, that doesn't work. That's silly. But they've decreed it, so they think it shall work. Because they've decreed it. It was because it was that bad normative creature. A lot of it comes because they want it to be this way. I know people are uncertain. How can you be uncertain? Well, a lot of times they don't want to be in modern academia, in modern government. You can be punished for the wrong opinion. In fact, heck, way back when, a woman was competing for a beauty contest. One was California, and it's a beauty contest. And they asked her a question: what do you think of gay marriage? And this is a 16-year-old woman competing for beauty contest. A kind of odd question. And one says, well, being that I'm a conservative Christian, I don't believe in gay marriage. I don't think we should have it just because, not a bad, thoughtful answer, whatever. One of the judges is a gay man. And he goes, that's stupid. He used the B word and he used the C word. There's only one answer, politically correct answer. And if that beep is not smart enough to get politically, then she shouldn't be able to compete in anything. Think about it. So, in a lot of places, and this is something we'll see as we go along, which is back when we hit the government roles that come in, which again, this suppressing of debate comes from communism. Neoclassicals, neo-Keynesians, all true economists want debate and discussion because we need to know what reality is. We want to know reality. And so we want discussion. We need discussion, want there. We can't have non-reality. The invasion of communism, of the bad note of, I want to be this way. And the naysayers should not be allowed to exist because they're hurting my feelings with their bad words. It destroys equality in the law. Horrible. But that impact of that has led to a lot of economists who will hold majoritarian opinions even though they know it's not right or it doesn't work because they will get punished. And so when you impose the minimum wage, again, we're going to get to this. I'm going rather fast. I'm going fast and go faster. Any of these price controls end up with a shortage of jobs. A shortage of jobs available. Now, we're talking about muffins. Again, the binding price floor. Now, again, these muffins right here. They're made but not sold. In other words, only these muffins over here. Only these muffins are sold. All these other ones from here to here, they're not sold. They're made, but not, how much is the firm getting for them? Nothing. Because these muffins are made because the government said that's the price. The firm said, I'm going to sell them, but nobody buys them. So I'm not selling them. So that's why these firms will go to the government and get the government to buy these goods that consumers will not buy. And so that means the government has to tax other industries, other people, to buy these goods from the firms that aren't selling. Evaluating them. Now, I notice markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Prices balance supply and demand. In other words, they balance the utility people get from the good, our demand, our desire for the good, what's it doing for us, and the capacity to make the good. See, it balances that. Price setting basically it blocks, prevents the allocation of these resources. Now it says, well, government can sometimes improve market outcomes. No. The government's motivated to control prices, but it didn't change reality. In other words, if I wanted to improve a situation, okay, how do I increase the supply of a good? Not supposed to say lower taxes or lower regulations or give an incentive for buying plant and equipment, stuff like that. But you can't just we'll control price, make it better. You can't because reality doesn't care. Again, the government views the market outcome as not fair. That's just reality. Well, it's not fair though. Just because you want doesn't mean what's your measure of fair? The market measures the fairness that the people want to buy the good gets to buy the good. That's it. People making the good, they choose to make the good. Price controls, and they do hurt people that intend to help. So there may be alternative policies that are often better to minimize negative reactions. Rent and wage subsidies. Now, tough thing is, rent and wage subsidies are expensive. Subsidies when the government gives you the money to help you buy the good. They can be very expensive because why? The government has to get the money from somebody else. That's impose taxes someplace else. It reduces some of the negative effects. And wage subsidies have been, on average, more effective than rent subsidies. Notice by wage subsidies is people are working already, and we give them a supplement when they work. If you're already working 40 hours a week, the government gives you extra money because you're poor. But it's lacked on to, are you working? The earned income tax credit goes there. Somebody in the house is already working, already earning money. We'll subsidize you to make your life easier. Because if you're already working, hey, if I'm already working 40 hours a week, why would I not want to find a better job? Again, both these can be expensive, but that's the rationale. And they're usually better than price controls. Okay, taxes we've already done. Taxes, the burden of the tax. We're going to do this one reasonably quickly. We already talk about taxes. Quantity sold is going to be small. When you impose tax, you're going to have less being produced, less being made. You have a deadweight loss. Same thing we saw in the previous PowerPoint slides. Buyers and sellers tend to share the tax when buyers pay more. In other words, the people buying the good, the price for the buyers, consumers, that's higher. The price to sellers, they're getting less. The tax is what's in between those. That's going to the government. Excuse me, I apologize. He's doing a very small tax here, so it's hard to see, and I've always disliked that one. And the reason I've done bigger ones is the fact of just so we can see it easier. Because this tax, if you say, well, I'm losing, keep in mind, it's a tax, and you're losing 10% of your output. In other words, it's a loss of 10% of output because of the tax. Nobody's getting that. Consumers and firms lose. Consumers are paying more for the good, we lose. Firms are getting less for the good, they lose. We have fewer goods. In other words, people have lost what? This seems like a small triangle, but we want to make it small so taxes can look good. And people say, oh yeah, but look, the government's getting this whole giant swath here. All this between the two prices, down from for consumers and the producers to the government. So, yes, the small divot is the deadweight loss. That's the inefficiency of the tax. Remember, that's 10% lost output. No one gained that. We just lost it. It's not there. Everything the consumers and the producers lost, the government gained besides the deadweight loss. And we're making an assumption when we tax, we're making the assumption the government will be just as good with your money as you are. Not more efficient, not less efficient. We assume it's just as good. So we call the imposition of the loss net box for consumers and producers, we call that a wash because they lost, the government get it. We said it's the same. We're doing that for simplicity's sake. Okay. Taxes tend to discourage market activity. In the here and now, there's less produced, but they're also going to produce more. In other words, the supply curve will not shift out as vigorously because the government has gone there to tax it. Now, buyers and sellers, and pinpoint, buyers pay more. When you have a tax, buyers are paying more for the good. Sellers are receiving less. I'm directly editing. The book said buyers are paying a lower market price. No, they are not. They're not paying a lower market price because remember, the book PowerPoint's made a mistake. Look at the after-tax price. Buyers pay that. The effective price, including taxes, rise for buyers. Now, if you're going to do a tax on buyers, that's just another way of important. Look, for example, we talk about online taxes. That's a tax on buyers. In other words, when you're being taxed online, the state of South Carolina, if I'm buying from Tennessee, the state of South Carolina is hitting me, the buyer, because I live in South Carolina. When somebody in California is buying a good online, the state of California has the ability to interrupt your transaction and tax you. They can't tax. That's one thing I'll give the law change, is when they allowed online taxation, they cannot, in other words, California cannot send the bill to the guy making swords. They still do this occasionally in West Virginia, who makes specialty swords people who order online. Theoretically, the state of California cannot send him a tax bill because they'd love to. They'd love to send him a tax bill and audit him and get money from him. In fact, that was the big fight for 2 decades and change over online taxation because states are going to do this. Again, the deadweight loss, that is a loss in output. I made and slapped in the graph and the other things so you can see it in greater detail. That gray area is the deadweight loss. That is the lost output, the lost level of production from the tax. And not being cruel or anything like that. So it reduces the level of production. It creates the deadweight loss. So remember, the tax comes in, our output goes down, consumers are paying more, firms are getting less, the government's getting the purple area, the dark gray area, this is lost output, lost production. Nobody gained that. People lost it, no one gained it. That's the inefficiency of the tax. Which means even if the government says good as you are with your money, not bad, it's good, we still have a deadweight loss, means it's inefficient. Again, we have the tax wedge, which we deal with PALO. It doesn't matter who's paying the tax. It is a tax. It is the deadweight loss. Again, the shift to the idea of tax wedge. In fact, I fought a little bit here because he's not doing this. Level of jobs, level of people having jobs decreased. Why not do that? Again, pressure on economists. We know the answer the government wants, and there are people in government who, if you don't give them the answer they want, they break your knuckles. So there are actually people in agencies and NGOs who have banned the use of deadweight loss. In other words, if you say the term deadweight, that's people who hate high taxes, who hate government. And they'll actually say stupid things like this. It's like you had some idiot a few years ago saying math was racist. Like, what? It's math. There's nothing racist about math. It's math. But they'll say talking when they say taxes. And a guy speaking in South Carolina state senate several years ago saying when they're talking lowering taxes that's racism. How is that racism? It's not. But he, as a government official, wants to control more tax revenue for his own ideas. Or he's just trying to demonize the other side, which is probably easy to. Elasticity, again, doing this one real fast, is how sensitive is the market to the tax. One of the reasons a lot of countries tax gasoline, which we saw from the previous PowerPoint sets, is because it raise a lot of revenue and have a small deadweight loss. But it's very damaging on the public. So anything that has a very inelastic price insensitive small elasticity, let's raise a lot of tax revenue. It won't cause as big a deadweight loss, but the consumer is hurt a lot. Remember, I am the government. I exist for the betterment of consumers. That's why the previous committee, it's funny. The current transportation secretary, I think it was, did a travel around to see about the expense of fuel and stuff like that. He was in front of the set saying, you were doing this trip. This was a pure publicity stunt. Who was paying for it? Oh, this is corruption. Okay, he was duplicating what the previous transportation secretary had done with electric vehicles. Except for the previous transportation secretary, her staff wasn't intelligent enough to make sure there were charging stations, so her giant convoy she was doing bogged up everywhere on interstates because they couldn't find charging stations. In other words, she spent a lot more money. They had a lot more follow-ups. They had to use a lot more resources because she couldn't do her stunt. The stunt was too expensive to do because of the inefficiency of the system. Okay, when demand is inelastic, again, you use us with demand. The consumers are twiggied. Sellers aren't hurt as much. Loss over is not as much relative to the angles and such. Again, as shown here. And I'm faulting him because here's the price the consumers are paying. Here's the price the firms are getting. Here's the old equilibrium price. Now notice that's the falling output. And this I'm trying to use marketing. That is the deadweight loss. That's the loss. Those are good loss. Nobody is getting. I'm just going, what's the tax incident? Basically, he's succumbing to the popular mythos. He does not want to say deadweight loss because he'll get kickback from NGOs and from the university which he teaches at, which is Harvard and such. He'll actually get slapped around for not having the proper opinion. I'm not being cruel here. Again, with inelastic supply, a lot of times inelastic supply, people think of the firms will pay the tax. Because look at this. So see, supply is inelastic, demand is elastic. Here's your starting price. Consumers only seeing their price increase a little. Firms are seeing what they get back decline quite a bit. So you have that. But now keep in mind, it's the short run. In the long run, like these firms, their production may be there, but I'm losing money making this good now. If firms losing money, firms leave the industry. So in the long run, like we saw on the graph, the supply curve is going to shift inward. We end up even though we went from a small deadweight loss to a huge deadweight loss because the supply shifted inward. We increased the cost of it. And that was with price controls. This can happen with taxes because, hey, I can't function. If I'm losing money, I cannot function. Simplified conclusion here. Price control taxes are very common and their effects are frequently debated. You got to realize these things don't work. Supply and demand are accurate measures. Those are reality. Defy reality, get burned. And a lot of governments defy reality because of the fact of they want to be a certain way. They'll say it doesn't exist, so it's not a problem, stuff like that. And it's like they'll even say it's pure positive. It's like not. Okay. People says, tax on food. And it's going to, given, an impact, I point at these things. If you're taxing food share is a 1% problem. People talk about food deserts. The food desert is when there's no grocery stores in the area. They're called food deserts. Like, oh, people are starving the poor people out. No. A grocery store operates on a 1% profit margin, maybe 1.5 in a good area. They depend on volume. If you have heavy taxes, if you have thievery, those stores shut down. That's just it. That's why it says food deserts happen in the area of high crime. You say, well, they should be there anyway. Like, was it Seattle and Portland tried to admit it? You will maintain these stores being there. If I'm losing money, that store's a dead weight. It's sucking wind. In fact, thievery is so bad, it wasn't a grocery store, it was a shoe store, one of the Nike stores in Portland. Nike found it cheaper to shut the store down, still keep everybody who's working there on their salaries, and have the store shut down. They were having so much theft, and it was just didn't have inventory. They just didn't open up. They said, "You guys going to show up to work, we'll pay you." Eventually, they moved the people who they're paying to do nothing out of the area someplace else, but it was cheaper that way. They were losing too much money. A lot of times, you're going to find the government's going to tend to be either lying like a rug or stupid or both. I know it sounds cruel, but the government will be there a lot of times. And that's the end of that one. Thank you so much.